Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 53rd Street Library NAWA panel discussion, part of the Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories exhibition. And I'm Jill Clifford-Barada, Executive Director of the National Association of Women Artists. Our president, Christy Devereaux, is also in the audience. Past presidents, Natalia, Penny, anybody else? Me, I'm a past president as well. Okay, so I want to just, he's out of the room now, but thanks to Greg Hendrick and Genevieve of the library who helped us set this all up, and the library, everybody here who's been very helpful. So, in case you didn't know, NAWA is the first women's art organization in the country, founded in 1889 by Dell Frances Bedell, Elizabeth S. Cheever, Grace Fitz Randolph, Edith Mitchell Prelwitz, and Anita C. Ashley. Women at that time were not allowed. Greg, I already thanked you. You missed it. Women were not allowed to exhibit women artists to exhibit their artwork along with men in the galleries of the time. So they started this as a club, and it has morphed over the years into what is now a 134-year-old association with a rich history. And NAWA is just as needed as ever to validate and honor women artists, help create the history of women's art, provide support for all the members who join our ranks, and not least of all, provide a platform for collectors to find the artworks of living American women artists. If you're curious, there's a lot of information as well as our online gallery on the NAWA website, www.thenawa.org. There's a quick link in the QR code, which is on the rack card. We have them over there, and you'll find that QR code also at the front of the exhibition. Before we introduce the panel, I just want to recognize we have three of the artists who are participating in the exhibit downstairs here. And so I want to just allow them to talk a little bit about their work. So they wrote statements, which you can find all the statements on the website, but since they're here, let's start with Kathleen. Her last name starts with C.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here and fabulously happy to be part of this organization. And I want to honor one of the people who is in my painting, who is here today, and that's Bernadette Drumgoole. And she is a wonder and a fabulous person. And she is the grandmother of the two children who were in the painting with her. And if you notice in the painting, there's an empty sort of space next to her. And that is an empty space that I left there because her daughter was the one who took the photograph I based my painting on. And I wanted to give space to her, even though she's not in the picture. I still wanted her included as well. So thank you all for being here, and it's my thrill to be part of this organization and this wonderful show. Thank you so much.
Could you please stand up and face the audience?
Yes, Bernadette, will you stand up? Thank you so much.
All right. Next, Sharon Krinsky. Oh, there's the fourth artist. Just in time. Well, you have a minute to get settled. We're going to hear from Sharon first.
Hi, everyone. My piece is called Rebel, and my name's Sharon Krinsky. I'm just going to read my description of my piece in the show. And of course, I'm also thrilled to be in it and to be in NAWA, a great honor. Okay. So my portraits and figurative collages, some with mixed media, of women are formed out of patterned and hand-painted papers, magazine pictures, acrylic paint and ink, and may include found objects. They are colorful and have an element of whimsy and suggest attitudes and other aspects of personality that tell a visual story. I love expressionism, cubism, folk art, and children's drawings, and they're major influences on my work. Thank you.
Okay, Natalia. I went slightly out of alphabetical order, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Natalia Korenkrov. I was with NAWA for about 12 years now, and it was such a journey. I'd like to say that the women around me who became my friends, some of them because they live in New York, and some of them virtually, and I had such a pleasure of knowing them and knowing that I'm not the only struggling artist who's trying to keep the family and art and my own sanity together. I'm very happy to be accepted into this exhibition. My piece is called Eddie. It's a portrait, it's a small egg tempera portrait on board, traditional technique. We wanted to combine the contemporary art student with a long lineage of artistic tradition, if you're in painting in particular, where I was studying, but also their self-expression, they're sort of spiritual warriors, and they proclaiming their own identity as they create their art. So Eddie identifies as a man, and they have a specific gender identity that they have chosen, and I wanted to portray this beautiful soul that this person possesses, because we sometimes are more, we artists know that we're more than a gender or a label that we all have on ourselves. Thank you.
Natalia. And last, Irene, would you like to come up to the front? She did the painting that's oil on canvas, blue, called Light and Darkness.
Yeah.
And she's going to tell you about it.
In those time, this is painting of 2014, and I painted about the fate of my grandmother, who was sent to Siberia from Belarus. She didn't speak Russian. She was confused because nobody knows the purpose and what she did. They just didn't want to enter collective farm, so it was a fault, and our family was sent to Siberia. So they end up in Vasyugan swamp. It's a place where mostly taiga goes to frozen land, and mostly it's swamp and taiga. So somehow she managed to save all her children. It was 6 children. They were sent in 1940, and in 1941 all men was taken to the war. So they were alone from different parts of Russia. Not only Russia, there was Polish people somehow. I don't know why they were sent to Siberia. A lot of people from different places, and they tried to survive together. So it was kind of, I think what helped her, it was her believing. She believed in God, and she think like the God helped her. At least she kind of tell it to the next generation. So in those time, I try to show this kind of something inside us we don't know, or something that helped us somehow. And sometimes we couldn't even express what it is. Some core inside you, maybe you inherited it, maybe it's your cultural thing. She didn't speak Russian, and she lived in Siberia. She chose not to come back to Belarus when she, after Stalin died in 1953. She refused to go back. I don't know why. nobody really spoke with her because her children spoke Russian language, but she refused to speak Russian language. She spoke only Belarusian, so this communication was kind of interrupted between her and the next generation and the next generation. So we don't know why she chose not to come back. She kind of accept her fate and choose to stay like that. I don't know, like it. It was my kind of idea. Thank you.
Nice to hear the story behind that. Yeah, thank you.
I'm here too. Margie.
Margie, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Can you do it quick?
Yeah.
Okay, because we want to get to the panel. I thought you were Margie. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I
We just
made
met.
27 portraits for this book about American music, and I guess I'm okay. And I did Patsy Cline telling her story, our story, and she's one of a few women in this book. And it's applique and embroidery, and it's red, white, and blue. And I tried to make it look very American and down to earth, like the music. Okay.
Sorry, Margie. I never got an email back. That's
What's the
okay.
name of the book? What's the name of it? Americana Land.
Americana Land. Okay, so one more, very quick. We have a lot of members here, and I just want to give a quick commercial because our NAWA annual members luncheon is coming up, and the 134th annual exhibition, which is going to be in June, and the deadlines are for both of those are April 28th. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that. Okay, so let's see. Thanks again to the artist participants for your statements. Okay, so the panel, Sandra Bertrand in front of me in the red, Pauline Chernichaw in the lavender, and Penny Dell on the end. I want to thank them all for their preparation and patience with dealing with me and the postponement, and all of you for the postponement. The weather today was a little better. Can you say? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with NAWA. So for each of you, if you could explain briefly how belonging to NAWA has impacted you in your art career. And we're going to start with Sandra. This is the order we're going to go.
Okay. Well, NAWA, a few years ago, I would say, in some respects seemed like an impossibility to me. Not really an impossibility, but it was one of those mountain peaks that I thought only the select few got to the top, the way I perceived it then. I took a longer, harder look at myself over my own career, which was very involved in multi-aspects of the arts. And even though I had started drawing at a very early age, I was, you might say, spiritually seduced by all the magic that was out there in various art forms. And so I took to the theater, and I acted, and then I wrote poetry, and then I wrote plays, and didn't try to play the piano until very recently. I saved that for a more mature period of my life. But I think that this journey of creativity put me in a little different position than the artists that I imagined were part of NAWA. It wasn't until about maybe 7 or 8 years ago I actually heard about NAWA. And I heard about NAWA through some very dear friends of mine upstate in the Woodstock area. And they were both painting, and they just happened to casually mention NAWA to me. And at that point, I'd retired from a full-time nonprofit job in the arts. And I had started painting again because I realized that somehow there was something visual that was missing from my life. And I took a short trip, which was a little easier to do now that I wasn't working 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day. And I took my first trip where I took paints along with me to Old San Juan and took a lot of photographs and had a wonderful time and came back and then started painting from my photographs. And I remember I showed them to a friend, and I obviously was excited just having done them. And these two friends in Woodstock said, "Oh, well, submit them to NAWA, why not?" And I said, "Why not?" "Well, because," I said, "everybody in NAWA must have just been professionally creating this great art for many years and then teaching about it." And I had, for a short time, been a teacher, but I was teaching television acting. There's a huge difference between that and teaching art. At least I thought so. But they insisted. So I did, and I was accepted. And I can't tell you during that first induction what it really meant to me. It was such a thrill because it was unexpected. I thought I would surely be rejected, and I was accustomed to being rejected, having been an actress. So I said, well, I think it's okay. I can handle this. But what it meant to me, validation. It was validation that it was okay for me to do this. And there was a quote that's in our current issue of NAWA Now, which perhaps I'll have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about a little later in our conversation. But it is a magazine that's been in existence now for about 5 years for our members. And our current issue, our president, Christy, was kind enough to put in a quote I thought was really quite marvelous. I wanted to share with you. She said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you stop to look fear in the face. You should do the thing you think you cannot do." And that was a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And thank you for that wonderful quote. And actually, Jill, in her own little preface, said some other wonderful things, one of which was that art is our lifeboat. So, ever since I've been a member of NAWA, I have been celebrating the fact that I was accepted into NAWA, and it's a wonderful sisterhood, as Christy always says. And so, I'm still here.
Same question for Pauline.
Hi, I'm Pauline Chernichaw, and I'm a visual artist working in painting and photography. Thank you, Jill Rada, Christy Devereaux, for inviting me to be on this panel with fellow members, Penny Dell and Sandra Bertrand. It is truly an honor to be here and to see all of you supporting the National Association of Women Artists, this country's first women's art organization. I have been a proud member of this remarkable organization for about 10 years, and I was inducted at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That to me was unbelievably special. For over 130 years, NAWA's mission and commitment to women in the arts has brought together artists of all mediums. It is our shared values as artists, the fellowship and our solidarity, especially during these times, that continues to uplift my spirits in the making of art. I do want to acknowledge one person who is here, a very special person. Her name is Grace Matthews. Grace Matthews is an artist. She's come all the way from California, and she is Faith Ringo's assistant for over 20 years. So, Grace Matthews, right here.
Oh my goodness, it came around really quickly. So I was thinking about the word career, about which we were asked, and I wanted to reflect back because that's what we're doing now. We're seeing the career from, the already embodied career that we're at. And but I grew up in a time where there were no role models for me to do this. My family had 5 brothers and a sister, and I was born in Mexico, and it seemed like a very chauvinist kind of society to get born into. I was really lucky that Mexico was so lush with art everywhere, murals and pyramids, and my father really loved one particular artist, and he put his paintings and his prints all over our house. And in a way, that artist became kind of the destiny, because I looked at his work a lot, studying it as I grew up. Fast forward through time, I had a very allergic daughter as a young mom, and we moved to New Jersey. And there, all the hopes and dreams and the drawing and the painting and all, that I had hoped to parlay into something, but had gotten waylaid in business and in teaching and in lots of other ways, finally came together with a group called Salute to Women in the Arts. And Salute to Women in the Arts basically gave all of us, a places to exhibit and to trade war stories and to really come together as artists. And that some very special people from that group in northern New Jersey were part of the National Association of Women Artists. And as much as we had done in exhibiting and in programs in New Jersey, that was expanded 1,000-fold with NAWA. So I saw ways in which helping each other put our art up, and helping each other with programs, and helping each other with art materials, and helping, our whole club, by sharing this information, really made an incredible difference. And in NAWA, times coast to coast when I got in, and I joined in 1991 along with our president, Christy Devereaux. And I believe we were in a classroom of NYU. I think you can date, the graduating classes by where they, they were inducted. And I really, really felt so honored and privileged. And the New York connection just seemed so amazing. So that's how I got to NAWA. Over the years, I want to say I worked from the bottom up. I started in the mailroom or something like that. Anyway, exhibitions, jurying, all sorts of things, and I'll tell you more about all the different jobs and where they brought me as we go along. So that's my story.
By the way, Penny's the first person I heard about NAWA from.
Yay.
Yay! This is how it works.
Advocacy.
So, I'd like you to describe where you are with your art journey now. What series or materials are you working with, and what are you saying with your work? So, maybe Sandra can talk about the transference from drama to art. Maybe, I don't know. What you do it.
Thank you. Well, I did a little reading. I'm always doing a little reading. Since I've spent a good part of my life writing, this transition to art, I just find it really fascinating how the creative urge expresses itself. And I came across in my reading very recently a comment by George O'Keeffe that I thought was very interesting. This was in her early painting career. And she said, "Words and I are not good friends at all. I have to say, in some way, I've been slaving on the violin, trying to make that talk." And then she went on to talk about her paintings were really songs. They were songs of herself without words, lines that she drew that could be read as clouds or rain or wind. And those transitions that my life has gone through always make it a journey. Penny and I were talking earlier about travel, because I do write a lot about travel along with art. And we talked about how we tend sometimes to take the little side roads. And so it really is as much the journey, if not more, than the actual destination. But where I am now with my art, I would say I find photography particularly interesting, not so much the pictures I take myself, which I love to do, but what I can get out of a photograph. And what I mean by that is I've been going through a period of my Strong Women series. And I do, when I'm not painting landscapes, I really enjoy portraits of women out of the past. Could be the recent past or longer. And I like being drawn, almost like a magnet, drawn to a particular image that I get, a feeling I get from a photograph. I'm not saying it's particularly mystical, but the power in a portrait. And I choose photography because I know that I'm going to use it as a leaping off point to then start my painting of that image. And I've found that to be a very interesting process. So that's the direction I'm currently going in. The work that I have in the current show is actually not quite as bold as some of the other work I'm doing. I think maybe it's a little more delicate because I think about Mary Cassatt being a very elegant woman, and so I guess I was thinking in a more delicate rendering when I did her. But I just want to mention in terms of her power, we don't always realize how certain people out of the past that we think were very talented, or we put them on a pedestal sometimes about their own position in life, and we may not always realize that somebody who was well born, like Mary Cassatt was, her family was somewhat influential. After an early trip to Paris, where she was trying to cobble the money together so she could draw in the Louvre, and came home finally and lived at home trying to figure out what she would do, how she would function. Her father would not pay for her art supplies. And it was finally because a good friend of her father's did recognize her talent and told her he would send her to Italy if she would sit and draw and paint copies of Correggio and bring them back. And it was through that trip that she was able to amass just enough money. She could go back to Paris, she could meet Degas, and you'd say, okay, all the rest is history. She had an easy time from that time forward. She didn't. She lost most of her paintings in the famous Chicago fire, which I believe was 1878. But anyway, I just mentioned that because all of these women that we admire today, either friends, associates through NAWA or whatever, we may feel they've got to a point in life where, it's fairly simple. But I read that Alice Neal, the famous Alice Neal, who I adore, recently, in her latter years, when asked about her early beginnings, she said, her mother said to her many times, "Alice, what will you do? You're just a girl." And so anyway, take faith. That's what I say. Take faith in yourself and don't be afraid.
Thank you, Jill. I just want to thank my friends, come to hear me. In talking about my journey as an artist, I want to first acknowledge all the creatives in my family who came before me. My father's mother was related to the world-renowned film director Stanley Kubrick. Her name was Pesach Kubrick. My dad's brother, Isaac, was an artist as well. Sadly, my father's immediate family perished in the Holocaust. My mother, Esther, was a profound storyteller. Relatives on my mom's side living today in different parts of the world are painters, filmmakers, costume designers, and amateur photographers. Since I could remember, I always thought of myself as an artist, even before I knew my family history. So with that said, I think I come from a pretty cool family. My own journey as an artist began in Germany. I was born in a displaced persons camp to parents who were Holocaust survivors. I came to the United States at the age of 2 on a transport ship. I would say I began making art with my earliest scribbles on the ship's program that my dad kept and I now have as part of my memorabilia. I was very fortunate growing up in the Bronx, attending the New York City public schools, which afforded me the opportunity to be exposed to the arts. A 4th grade field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art sealed my destiny as an artist. My creative spirit was aroused at seeing the painting View of Toledo by El Greco. The museum became my go-to place. I was also very fortunate to live next door to an artist named Toby Fluick, who was a friend of my mother's and also a Holocaust survivor. I would copy her work using materials she would provide. Toby Fluick's paintings of her childhood memories in Poland are now in the permanent collection of the Florida State Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. Looking back on that time, I was very well aware that I was being raised in a different culture than my American friends. It was my mom who told me stories of her life and my dad's life in Poland and the Ukraine. The good, the bad, and the ugly. My childhood environment and experiences, being a recent immigrant and speaking only Yiddish, had an impact on shaping the person and artist I am today. My views about myself and the world were taking form. I had several teachers throughout my school years who encouraged me to pursue art, including my junior high school teacher, Mrs. Kaufman. Unfortunately, in college, I wasn't pleased at what I was creating and trashed most of my early work. At Brooklyn College, I studied with Professor Viola, who was a true inspiration. His love of art, art history, and world history taught me about the human drive to create. Married and at home in New Jersey, raising 2 children, I would paint in my kitchen. I began feeling extremely isolated from the art community and joined a local art organization.
Salute.
I started shooting photographs to get myself out of the house. Because of health issues, I abandoned oil paint for acrylic paint. While my sons were in school, I studied photography at NYU and ICP, where I took classes with the prominent photojournalist Mary Ellen Mark and the renowned Magnum photographer Alex Webb. It was Alex Webb who had a great influence on my evolving understanding of the world through the camera lens. I saw myself as a street photographer and found inspiration and a sense of home and freedom exploring the New York urban landscape. It was at that time I also thought about becoming a photojournalist. I knew I had something to say, and the camera was my tool when I wasn't painting. While exhibiting work in a Lower East Side gallery, I had a negative experience with an older male art critic. He loved my work, took me around to art galleries, but as we all know, we know the story, why don't you come to my studio and I'll show you my etchings? Well, that actually did happen to me. I stopped making art, thinking if this is what I had to do to get my work shown, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But, as with all passions, I empowered myself to continue creating work, and in the late 1990s, while my husband and I were living in Florida, I became a docent at the St. Petersburg Museum of Fine Arts. I had a small studio where we lived and began creating pocket-sized artwork using Prismacolor pencils. Being a die-hard New Yorker, I was not thrilled about living out of the New York area, and my art started to reveal an unsettling self-examination. I began sketching my own unreal narratives and realities. With all the small works I was creating, there was one particular 5x7 drawing I finished of a mother and young daughter standing in a forest with their hands up in the air being arrested. Something was happening. I was telling a story about my dad's family, a telltale sign of what was to come. Happily, we did move back up north. I was juried into the Soho Photo Gallery in Tribeca, followed by Ceres Gallery, a women's art collective in Chelsea. Today, I am thrilled to be included in the roster of artists at Carter Burton Gallery, also in Chelsea. Around 2015, I was compelled to paint a long-kept family secret that my mom told me when I was young concerning her Aunt Razel. I didn't finish the work until around 2019. I ended up titling the painting, Family Secret, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? I was grateful that my mom had given me the gift of storytelling, and that the gift was her storytelling that was passed down to me. Through my artwork, I was recounting a personal narrative of family history, family ancestry, and the Holocaust, giving voice to the life that was lost. I came to the realization that my art was being shaped by both my world of the past and my world of today. I recently saw the play, The Collaboration, about the relationship between Warhol and Basquiat, with fellow NAWA members and friends Susan Sinek and Ann Winston Brown. In the play, Basquiat said that he painted his deceased friends so that they would live. I understood at that moment that that was what I'm doing in my work, painting all of whom were lost in order for them to live again, including me. Jerry Saltz, in his book, Art is Life, says, and I quote, "Art is something like an undoing of death." I should not be surprised that my journey as an artist would take me to where I am today, but I am a little bit surprised. Like my dear friend and iconic artist Faith Ringgold, my art references and draws upon stories of strong women intertwined with family history. It's all there in my paintings, such as Women Giving Birth with Staples, Scream Until You're Heard, Beware, Somewhere Else, Battalion 101, Red Beret. My visual language is sometimes straightforward, sometimes ambiguous, sometimes symbolic, and sometimes representational. I'm always looking inward, uncovering buried realities. Just as Faith Ringgold tells her stories, we artists also have stories to tell. Facing barriers, Faith was never ever deterred and followed her own path. She has taught me that when the art world tells you you can't, you say, oh yes, I can. Now, at the age of 92, Faith is considered a living legend, and Picasso's masterpiece, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, hangs next to Faith Ringgold's masterpiece, Die, at the Museum of Modern Art. At the moment, the work is at the Picasso Museum in Paris, where I will be visiting in late spring. To conclude, I don't know if I will ever reconcile the world I was born into, but the one thing I do know is we as artists will keep working, following our own paths to wherever it takes us. Looking back on my life's experience, it all now makes sense. I am where I am supposed to be. I'm a visual storyteller. I'd like to end by quoting something Faith always asks me. So what's the story? And so I ask all of you, so what's your story? Thank you.
Ooh. So, my answer to this question was just describing the materials and how I evolved with them. I guess the first time I really focused on the figure was in Mr. Gappard's 6th class at my expatriate British school in Mexico City. So it's like that disjointure of, a child in a British school in Mexico learning about pounds and shillings and pence, and then having the joy of simply drawing a figure represented an incredible escape. And I still love the pencil and charcoal that I used in those days and that can show so much. And today at MoMA, I was just so in awe of what Georgia O'Keeffe managed to do with charcoal. She basically bore down on that charcoal, and all around that charcoal is pristine paper with maybe just the tiniest bit of a shadow from some of the drifting charcoal. But anyway, my journey started with charcoal and pencil, and I still do use a lot of it extensively because I have now evolved through many series, and I use not only that pencil and charcoal, but also oil and collage and encaustics, and in lots of different processes. To me, the next big milestone was learning to print with Dorothy Cochran at Old Church Cultural Center. And I loved monoprints, just generated one after another in series. At that point, I was doing marathons, and I made a big series over what I perceived was, the action of a long assembly, a crowd of runners, sort of like, those action photos that are repeated. And I was using ink rolled out on plexi and with runners' forms on it. Fast forward through time, I went through a series doing windows, and which were woodcuts. And you wouldn't think that woodcuts would transmit the quality of light very well, but I was using all sorts of different papers and to create a door and a window that would permit light to illuminate the room that I depicted. And these days, I have discovered the joys of the patterns inside of security envelopes. So I take some of my prints and I upholster them mostly with hexagons of those patterns. Your bills that you get, from your insurance or your utility or your bank statements, all of that financial information needs to be protected and camouflaged. And if you look at those patterns, they're beautiful. So now I've tried all sorts of things. I put those hexagons between layers of handmade paper that I make, and they dry and they contract around them in different ways. I sometimes use chicken wire to support, both the paper and the patterns. And the work merges from very tiny works to, considerable 36 by 36 size works. I'm also using encaustic, so I layer on top of the collage, on top of the print, with this wonderful pigmented wax. The headquarters of the encaustic empire are in Houston, New York, and I happen to be near it, so I get to go over there and rent the studio and play with all the colors, which include gold and lovely pewter, and it's really a pleasure. So right now I could see myself drifting away from the joy of collage and being very careful and creating ancient quilting patterns called tumbling blocks, and into just letting it rip with a color, because the flow of that delicious volcanic red or the delicious volcanic cobalt are really seductive. So with that, you'll have to come and see, the encaustics soon.
We must get a wireless. Anyway, thank you for those wonderful answers. I have another set of questions, individualized here. So for Sandra, you've been working closely with NAWA. You mentioned the newsletter that you founded with Mimi Herrera-Pease that's evolved into what is NAWA Now, the online magazine. Recently, you stepped down as the editor-in-chief, although you're still helping. We don't abandon here. But I'd like you to talk about how writing for NAWA Now has been for you as a writer and an artist, and also you might want to address for all of us how important writing is in general for artists, to you and to us.
Great, I'd love to do that. Well, I guess my love of writing has been a constant, and it's interesting how it took form with NAWA. I was a member of NAWA for, I guess, at least 2 or 3 years before it occurred to me that there were a lot of stories, wonderful stories, that I would love to hear about, but we weren't always hearing about, because not everybody uses the written word or even puts it into words they can describe as storytelling, like the wonderful story we just got from you, which I will treasure. So I felt that it was something that was missing. And let me put it to you this way. Answering the silence which often accompanies a work of art, particularly with abstract paintings. So there are little or no clues, as one might find in a representational work. Some artists are reticent about describing a work, either because their visual skills are greater or because they don't see the need. nor should it be required. The work should be able to speak for itself. But I still look for answers. And I think that silence is something that has drawn me to various themes, various places on the map, and certainly a canvas or a sculpture or a photograph that I just can't get out of my head. And many, many times the artist, as I just read to you in my own thoughts, is reticent about describing that work because they truly believe that the work should speak for itself. And the way I see a painting, looking at the same painting that, for instance, any one of you might, I might get entirely different things out of that. But I couldn't help feeling that there was a need, and that really, in a way, was the genesis of NAWA Now, which started as a I don't want to say simplistic, but a rather abbreviated, basic newsletter. But it quickly became something else because the more I began to explore all the voices that were out there in our NAWA artists, and also just what was out there in the world at large that women were doing, there were a lot of stories to be told. And also I wanted the artists to have an opportunity to hear more about their president, their executive director, other chapter heads, since we have 3 very active chapters, and to be able to keep them in the know about what those chapters were doing. So that certainly was part of what I wanted to give voice to through NAWA. And also, again, as from what I said in the beginning about describing the work, to give voice to the images that were submitted to us for the magazine, the color, the line, the perspective, the play between spaces and images, and to put that into words that would help the reader or the viewer understand better. And, that process of sharing. As far as my writing, it in some respects it's similar to painting, in that there's an urge, there's a desire, there's a passion. You wake up one morning and there's something that you want to find a way to express, and you don't always know how it's going to come out. And I feel fortunate in that the 2 loves of my life, I guess, that have been continuous, my writing and my art, that sometimes they overlap, and one wants to give voice to the other. And I always like to tell the story that many years ago, right when I first moved to New York, and I was fooling around with a little painting in my studio kitchen, and I had these 3 ghostly images of women in the foreground that I had painted in, and in the background there was a shadow figure that I couldn't really make out the outline. It was like some background in the painting that just didn't make sense to me. And the more I looked at it, I said, my God, this isn't a painting. This is a play. And I was beginning to get some of my plays done off Broadway at that time. And it became a play, and with some very interesting actresses. And I'm glad in that case that it didn't turn out to be a painting, you see. But it satisfied the urge that I had. And I'm currently working on a screenplay that I had started back in 1986, right after the Chernobyl disaster. And I was so struck by the horror of that event. And so I let it settle and impregnate itself in me for a while until I began to get a set of New York characters in 1986 that found themselves confronting this young, pregnant teenage girl who had arrived from Kiev, and how their lives were changed by that event. And so screenplays can be very visual. And so, that was, accomplished with words through dialogue and images. And I realized after all these many years, the number of times that I submitted the script, but many Americans didn't even seem to know at that point where Ukraine was. And now, after all this time and going back through my closet of writings, I brought it back out, and I've been doing a little rewrite on it, and very excited about it, and working on my travel writing, but that's not really getting right down to the brass tacks of NAWA Now. I'm very, very proud of NAWA Now, and I think that it's been an excellent way for members to connect with one another, especially during COVID, because I knew that a lot of lives were turned inside out because of the pandemic, and how that affected our artist members, how that affected the work they were doing, whether they could even continue to work under those circumstances. And so that was a little bit more of a serious time for the magazine, feeling that those stories really needed to be told. And in the last couple of years, I had help from Sarah Katz, who's a member of NAWA, and also I had help from the beginning with Mimi on our California membership. And so we were communicating back and forth, coast to coast, and she had a very wonderful graphic sensibility, and she's stayed with it, and I hope that I can keep peeking in from time to time, and maybe, who knows, in the future, maybe even get back to a more active role. But it's a very vital thing for the membership, and I hope that our members will continue to send in letters and ideas and news about their exhibits, and
So Pauline had an individual question, but I think she already answered it.
I think I did.
She did. But I want to ask you, you could probably address this quickly.
Okay.
So you mentioned a little bit about your photography,
Okay.
and you have, it's almost like there's two people going on. There's the photographer and there's the painter. Can you just talk about who those two are? Just
Originally I was originally a painter, but I needed to be outside. I was in the house always painting, and I had this need to be outside, to be a little bit more social, to be with friends, but at the same time create. So I thought, well, if I pick up a camera, I can walk outside, be with my friends, and look around at the same time. My friends always call me a slow walker. And the reason why I walk so slowly is because I'm constantly looking and my eyes are constantly taking pictures. So that was my whole idea about doing photography, that when I wasn't painting, I felt that I needed to still create, and for me to create outside, I could do it with a camera.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Perfect. Good. Thank you.
and I can relate.
Yes.
Perfect. So Penny, we mentioned you're a past president of NAWA, and you're still a board member, current board member. You have been for a while. Your knowledge of NAWA women artists goes way back. So I think you would love to talk about 2 or 3 NAWA members who you were close to, whose work you most admired or have studied the most, and why they had an impact on you and NAWA.
That's Penny's question.
Well, NAWA is full of amazing, amazing people, and I couldn't even start to tell you all about it. But in the course of all, the jobs I've had and have had the pleasure and honor of doing, I guess one of the things that I really loved doing was getting the jurors for our annual. And our annual disperses more than $10,000 in money for the art, and you don't have to part with your artwork, and you get the honor of getting a really terrific artist. So we normally, in the old days, they used to have 12 judges, and some of those were men. So if you look in the old catalogs, you see it looks like the jurors, in a courtroom. But more lately, we've gone for 3, a curator, a sculptor, and a 2D person. And along through the years, I want to tell you about how I got Faith Ringgold to come and jury. So I lived near her in northern New Jersey, and I thought, oh, she lives in Englewood, I can call her. So, I kept calling, and there was leaving messages. We need you to jury. And, I was persistent. It wasn't only 1 year. It was only 2 years. It was like years. And finally I got a response. And it turned out that Faith had been teaching in California, so, there's no point on responding for a New York gig at that point. And it was Grace who responded and said, yes, Faith would love to come and jury. So I got to pick Faith up and drive her, and I remember I made cookies, and she really liked those oatmeal cookies. Anyway, so Faith got to be an amazing friend and resource. She had already been a luminary member, and it felt like having, a child back in a way, or, an inspiration back. And so in the course of, getting judges, I also got Jennifer Bartlett to the Elizabeth Foundation for a small annual that we had there. We had very strict sizes on that year. But, I have this image of us both looking out the second floor window of the Elizabeth Foundation at the bridal shop across the way, which I think is now gone. But, it was really interesting to hear all her comments on the art and why she was picking it. And she and the other 2 jurors from that year had to all agree on the big prizes, which are substantial, like, $800 to $1,000. And so that was really wonderful. Ursula von Reidingsvard came to jury a show that we had at our headquarters on 14th Street and 5th Avenue. And so she had a very strict diet. So I had to I made sure that I got her carrot juice and, her favorite things for snacks while she was jurying. Anyway, there's lots of memorable stories like that because, they stick with you. Howardina Pindell, a treasure. She lives up near the cloisters, and she was really generous with her time and went all the way out to Pennsylvania to jury the show that we had at the Banana Factory. So, the impact of those wonderful people on NAWA, and think of all the pride of the people whose work they chose, having kind of the imprimatur from somebody who's, an art luminary. It means a lot. So, but I have to say those are a once a year day. The rest of the year, the wonderful people that grind down daily to make themselves answer all the email, and like Jill and Christy and Nadia in her time, and Jill, as president and executive director now. It's like, and it just is an amazing bunch of people to work with. That it's an inspiration, and then we get to be part of this continuity, now 134 years old, and keep an institution that has helped thousands of us, sort of zone in on our genius and feel, that we have a mission. And helping is really important. Others too, it's sort of like the Buddha coming back and making sure that other Buddhas, are born, from our good intentions.
Wonderful. So, the jurors, the individual illuminary information that we've just all received, I think this has really been great. We have time for some questions. I want to just point you to, we have printed out some reading lists. This could go on for pages and pages and pages, but these are some current books that have been brought to our attention. I'm in the middle of Judy Chicago's autobiography. We can't sell books here. This is just a list and some display. Greg was saying that he heard Linda Nochlin talk a couple of times, and Maura O'Reilly is affiliated with the Zimmerli Museum at Rutgers now, and she's also been a juror for NAWA. She's and she's the author of that book. The Teresa Bernstein book is written by Gail Levin, who's a tremendous scholar on not only Teresa Bernstein, but Edward Hopper. And so, this is all interesting stuff over here if you don't have questions. But if you have questions, we have a little time. Anita, could you shout it out?
Yes, I have a question for Penny. Going back to your opening statement, do you remember who the artist was who so impressed your father?
Yes, his name is Francisco dos Amantes, and he signs his name to Amantes, and he was part of this group called that worked in a workshop, Taller de Gráfica Popular, and it's called TGF. There's a big collection at the New York Public Library, another reason to support the New York Public Library, that includes all the many American expatriates that went to Mexico to among other things, print there. And Jackson Pollock is one of those people, and oh my goodness, Bob Blackburn also went there. Elizabeth Catlett also went there to the Taller de Gráfica Popular, and that's where my father found Francisco dos Amantes. So since then, I've tried to learn more about, those artists from that. It's very much a community print shop that anybody can walk into and print at. And, the people would help you to do it. I think it's now gone. It folded in the 50s, but there's lots of scholarship about it because there were a lot of people that arrived from like Germany, Nazi Germany escapees, and so the head of the Taller de Gráfica Popular was from the Bauhaus. So you can bet that they had really terrific artists, and artwork coming out of that. So I especially was impressed by the lithographs because this artist went out into the provinces and he drew the people, so there were women in hammocks, There were, people feeding ducks. There was a woman with a baby on her hip talking to her neighbor. There were the tortilla makers, and they were rendered in really sculptural things that I didn't know at the time were deemed muralismo, which is, the same kind of mural forms that look so sculptural, in large size, were here in small lithographs, like if they had been carved out of stone or something, They were very dimensional. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, but was your father also an artist, or was he a writer?
He was not. He was actually an international CPA, which, and he had, an amazing career that shaped our family. So he started off in England. He got shipped off to Argentina to audit British railways. Then he got shipped to the Philippines, where he ended up in a concentration camp with the Japanese, and with 2 small children and my mother. They survived. They emigrated to Virginia, and then he was asked to import Studebakers to Mexico. I'm a Studebaker baby.
My parents had a Studebaker. Any other questions? Anybody? Well, I'm just going to thank you all for coming. This has been, I don't know if you agree, I think it's been great. Yes. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the participating artists in the exhibit downstairs. If you haven't seen it, take a few minutes before they kick everybody out of here. And, we'll call this a day.